You think wearing a suit makes you legitimate, huh? Officer Raymond Williams pointed aggressively at the man in the tailored tan suit, his voice dripping with contempt. He thought he was about to make the arrest of his career. He thought he'd finally step out of his father's legendary shadow. He thought he was looking at a well-dressed drug dealer flaunting his wealth outside a known cartel headquarters. He was wrong. Dead wrong. What Williams didn't know was that the tan suit cost more than his monthly salary, but it wasn't bought with drug money. It was standard-issue FBI attire for undercover financial operatives. He didn't know that the modified Dodge Charger he was about to tow had $2 million worth of surveillance equipment hidden in its dashboard. Equipment currently recording a $50 million drug deal happening across the street. And he certainly didn't know that in exactly 30 minutes, the FBI director would be calling the Chicago police commissioner, demanding to know why a rookie cop just destroyed the biggest fentanyl bust in Midwest history. Buckle up. This is the story of how one traffic stop cost the federal government $50 million, freed an entire drug cartel, destroyed a police captain's legacy, and turned a promising career into a cautionary tale taught in every law enforcement academy in America. It was 9:47 on a sunny Tuesday morning on the west side of Chicago, the kind of deceptively beautiful day where the sunlight made even the crumbling brick of abandoned buildings look almost hopeful. Special Agent Bruno "Ghost" Johnson sat inside his modified 2015 Dodge Charger, parked in a no-parking zone outside what used to be a corner grocery store. The building now served as the headquarters for the Disciples of Chaos, one of the most violent fentanyl distribution networks in the Midwest. He was 37, with the kind of composed, professional bearing that came from 15 years of deep cover work. Today, he wore a tailored tan suit, expensive but not flashy. No one walking past would give him a second glance, which was exactly the point. In his ear, barely visible, sat a wireless earpiece. On the dashboard in front of him, hidden behind what looked like a standard navigation screen, ran a real-time audio feed from inside the building across the street. Johnson was the FBI's ghost. For 18 months, he'd been building this case, brick by brick, meeting by meeting, earning the trust of men who killed informants without hesitation. He was currently listening to the final piece of the puzzle. Cartel leadership confirming distribution routes, payment structures, and connections that spanned 5 states. This was the day. Just a few more hours and 18 months of dangerous, exhausting work would finally pay off. The car was a masterpiece of deception. It was a black Dodge Charger RT with custom suspension to handle the weight of hidden surveillance equipment, tinted windows that met legal limits but concealed the technology within, and modifications that screamed money to the criminal element Johnson needed to impress. To the untrained eye, it looked like a successful dealer's ride. To a trained eye, it would have raised red flags everywhere. Officer Raymond Williams did not have a trained eye. 2 blocks away, the 24-year-old rookie sat in his patrol car, binoculars raised, watching that Charger with growing excitement. He'd been on the force for exactly 4 months. His father, Captain Gerald Williams, had been a Chicago PD legend for 30 years, and Ray had yet to make a single significant arrest. Today, he thought, that was about to change. The dashboard clock read 6:47 a.m. when Bruno Johnson first slid into the driver's seat of the Charger, his 3rd cup of coffee already cooling in the center console. The street was still quiet, the kind of dead silence that comes just before a city wakes up and remembers it has places to be. He reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror, not to see behind him, but to get a clean sightline on the second-floor windows of the building across the street. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, tapping the navigation screen 3 times in a specific sequence. The display flickered, and suddenly the GPS map disappeared, replaced by a waveform visualization and 3 separate audio channels. Channel 1, Main Meeting Room. Channel 2, Hallway outside. Channel 3, Rear Exit Monitoring. He slipped the wireless earpiece in, twisted it until it sat flush with his ear canal, invisible unless you were looking for it. The audio crackled to life. Muffled voices, footsteps, the scrape of chairs being moved. They were setting up for the meeting. Johnson exhaled slowly, forcing his heart rate down. 18 months. 18 months of being someone else, of sleeping with one eye open, of shaking hands with men who'd killed for less than the price of his coffee. 18 months of building a legend so deep that even he sometimes forgot where Bruno Johnson ended and Ghost, the money launderer, began. He remembered the first meeting, 9 months in, when Cartel Lieutenant Marcus Reaper Davis had put a gun to his head just to see if he'd flinch. Johnson hadn't. He'd smiled and asked if Reaper wanted to do business or play games because his time was worth money. The gun had lowered. The deal had gone through. And Johnson had thrown up in a gas station bathroom 20 minutes later, hands shaking so hard he could barely turn the faucet. He remembered the close call in month 14 when a low-level dealer thought he recognized Johnson from somewhere. Maybe a courthouse. Maybe a news report. Johnson had spun a story about having a corporate twin, some FBI suit who shared his face, and how that's why he stayed off social media. The dealer had laughed. Johnson had bought him a drink. The wire had kept recording. And now, today, all of it came down to this. The final meeting. The big table sit down where territory got divided, routes got confirmed, and money got counted. The disciples of chaos leadership would be laying out their entire distribution network across 5 states: Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, St. Louis. $50 million in fentanyl. Connections to suppliers in Mexico. Names, dates, locations. Everything the FBI needed to dismantle the whole operation in one coordinated sweep. Johnson glanced down at his tan suit, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from his knee. The suit was perfect. Expensive enough to signal success, understated enough to avoid flash. In this world, you dressed like money that didn't need to shout. Cartel accountants and launderers wore suits. Street dealers wore chains. Johnson was playing the long game and he looked the part. Just a few more hours, he whispered to himself, watching the windows across the street. This is what 18 months has built to. His right hand moved to the center armrest, pressing down on what looked like a standard storage compartment. It clicked open, revealing a false bottom. Inside, wrapped in a microfiber cloth, sat his FBI credentials, the real ones, shield and ID card in their leather bifold. He stared at them for a moment, at his own face looking back from the photo, clean-cut and official. Special Agent Bruno Johnson, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He couldn't carry them on his person. Not today, not ever during an operation like this. If the cartel found federal credentials in his pocket, they wouldn't ask questions. They'd put bullets in his head and dump his body in the river before he could say a word. The car was the only safe place, hidden in a compartment that would take specialized tools to find. He closed the compartment, listening to it click shut with a finality that felt heavier than it should. The charger itself was a work of art, built by FBI techs who specialized in covert operations. From the outside, it looked like a tastefully modified streetcar, custom rims, subtle body kit, tinted windows that met Illinois legal limits at exactly 35%. But beneath the surface, it was a mobile surveillance station. The dashboard housed 3 hidden cameras with fisheye lenses. The door panels concealed directional microphones. The trunk held backup recording equipment, signal boosters, and a satellite uplink that fed directly to an FBI listening post 3 miles away. The suspension had been reinforced to handle the extra weight without sagging. Even the paint, deep black with metallic flake, had been chosen because it looked expensive but didn't photograph well, making the car harder to identify in security footage. $2 million of technology wrapped in the shell of a car that cost $40,000. Through his earpiece, Johnson heard new voices filtering in. He recognized them immediately. That was Diego Flaco Martinez, enforcer, wanted in 3 states. The higher-pitched voice was probably Terrence Money Williams, the comptroller who handled the cash. And then, the one that made Johnson's pulse quicken. The deep, or gravelly bass of Marcus Reaper, Davis himself, the man who ran the entire Disciples of Chaos network. "All right, let's get this done," Reaper's voice came through. "Ghost says the new routes are clean. We move the product through his channels. We double our capacity by July." Johnson allowed himself the smallest smile. They trusted him. Completely. His phone buzzed silently. A text from SAC Rebecca Martinez at the FBI field office. "All teams in position. We're green across the board. Sit tight and let them talk." Johnson typed back with one thumb. "Copy. It's happening." He settled deeper into the leather seat, eyes on those second-floor windows, ears full of incriminating voices. The sun was starting to climb, painting the brick buildings in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. A garbage truck rumbled past. Just a few more hours. Just let them say it all on tape. And then this nightmare could finally end. The flash of blue and red lights in his rearview mirror hit Johnson like a punch to the gut. For a split second, he couldn't breathe. His eyes darted to the mirror, watching the patrol car roll to a stop 20 feet behind him, the light bar painting the street in alternating colors. "No," he whispered, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Not now. Not today." Through his earpiece, Reaper's voice continued, oblivious. "So we move the first shipment next Tuesday. Ghost handles the transfer. We clear $2 million by Friday." Johnson's mind raced. He couldn't turn off the wire. That would kill the audio feed and alert the FBI team that something was wrong. He couldn't step away from the car and leave the equipment unattended. And he absolutely could not let this escalate into something that would draw attention from the building across the street. In his side mirror, he watched a young white officer step out of the patrol car, adjust his duty belt, and start walking toward him with that particular stride cops use when they've already decided you're guilty of something. Johnson took a slow breath, opened his door, and stepped out with his hands visible at his sides. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, professional. Hands away from his waistband, body language open, face calm. This was just a conversation. Nothing more. "License and registration," the officer said before Johnson could speak. The name tag read Williams. He looked young, mid-20s at most, with the kind of eager intensity that made Johnson's stomach drop. Rookies were dangerous. They had something to prove. "You know you're in a no-parking zone?" Johnson kept his voice level, measured. "Officer, I understand this looks unusual. It looks like you think the rules don't apply to you." Williams cut him off, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. Not threatening, not yet, but close enough to send a message. Johnson felt the wire feed still running in his ear, felt the weight of 18 months pressing down on his shoulders. He needed to de-escalate this fast, get this kid to leave before someone in that building noticed and started asking questions. He chose his words like he was defusing a bomb. "I'm going to need you to contact your watch commander before we proceed." Williams's eyes narrowed. "I don't need my commander for a traffic stop. Why are you nervous?" I'm not nervous. Johnson kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed. I'm asking you professionally to make one phone call. But Williams wasn't listening anymore. He was circling the charger like a predator, his eyes cataloging every detail. The custom rims, the low-profile tires, the window tint that was dark but still legal. Johnson watched him crouch slightly to look at the suspension, saw him run his hand along the door panel. "This is a nice car for this neighborhood," Williams said, straightening up. His tone had shifted from official to accusatory. "How do you afford a car like this?" The question landed like a slap. Johnson felt the familiar burn of anger rising in his chest, the kind he'd felt 1,000 times in his life but had learned to bury. He kept his voice even. "I work just like you. What kind of work?" Johnson hesitated. This was the tightrope. He couldn't say FBI. That would blow everything. He couldn't say nothing. That would make Williams more suspicious. He went with the cover story, the one he'd used for 18 months. "I'm in financial consulting." Williams actually smirked. It was the kind of smile that said, "I've got you figured out." Financial consulting, right, for who? Those guys across the street? In his earpiece, Johnson heard the conversation inside the building stutter. A new voice, urgent and sharp. "Yo, we got police outside." Another voice, higher, anxious. "What? Where?" "Right out front. Cop cars lit up. Ghost is talking to them." Johnson's blood went cold. He kept his face neutral, but inside, everything was screaming. They were watching. Of course they were watching. The disciples of chaos didn't survive by being careless. They had lookouts, cameras, paranoia baked into their DNA. Reaper's voice cut through the chatter. "Ghost better not be bringing heat to this meeting. If he's working with them, he's not." Someone interrupted. "Look at him. He's calm, probably just a parking thing." "Probably," Reaper growled. "But if it's not, we're done here. Everybody stay ready to move." Johnson heard it all, every word. 18 months of trust balanced on the edge of a knife. And this rookie cop was about to knock it over without even knowing what he was destroying. Williams was still talking, still circling. "You seem pretty calm for someone who's about to get towed. Most people in this neighborhood, they get nervous when they see me. But you're standing there like you're doing me a favor." "Officer Williams," Johnson said, and he let just a trace of authority creep into his voice. Not enough to sound threatening, but enough to signal that he wasn't some street corner dealer. "I'm asking you again. Please call your watch commander. Verify that this vehicle is authorized to be here. One phone call. That's all I'm asking." Williams stopped pacing. He looked at Johnson, really looked at him, and for a moment Johnson thought maybe the kid would listen. "You're stalling," Williams said flatly. "You want me to call my boss so your friends have time to show up, or so you can call your lawyer or whatever play you're running. I know how this works." "You don't," Johnson said quietly. "You really don't." Inside the building, the voices were getting more agitated. Johnson could hear chairs scraping, footsteps moving. The meeting was fracturing. People were getting ready to bail. "We should postpone," someone was saying. "If the cops are watching, we don't postpone," Reaper snapped. "We handle it. Ghost gets rid of that cop, or we get rid of Ghost." Williams pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23. I need a tow truck at West Madison and South Kedzie. Suspicious vehicle. Driver is uncooperative." The words hit Johnson like a freight train. Tow truck. They were going to tow the car. $2 million in federal surveillance equipment. 18 months of recorded evidence. Everything. "Officer," Johnson said, and for the first time, there was urgency in his voice. "Do not tow this vehicle." Williams looked at him with something almost like satisfaction. "You don't give me orders." "I'm not ordering," Johnson said, his jaw tight. "I'm begging. Call your supervisor, one call." "Why? So your friends can show up? So you can call your lawyer?" Williams shook his head. "I know how this works." Through the earpiece, someone in the building said, "Deal's off. The cop's not leaving. Everybody out the back, now." Johnson closed his eyes. 18 months, gone. Williams held out his hand, palm up. "License and registration, now." Johnson reached slowly into his jacket pocket, moving with exaggerated care so the rookie wouldn't spook and reach for his weapon. He pulled out his wallet, extracted his driver's license, the real one, Bruno Johnson, with a Chicago address that was actually a bureau safe house, and held it out. No sudden movements. No reason to escalate. Williams snatched it from his hand and walked back to his patrol car, leaving Johnson standing on the sidewalk. Through his earpiece, Johnson could hear the chaos building inside the headquarters. Voices overlapping, chairs scraping, the sharp bark of orders being given. The meeting was disintegrating in real time. Johnson stood perfectly still, his mind racing through scenarios. He could flash his badge right now, and this in 10 seconds. But there were eyes on him from those second-floor windows. If the disciples saw him pull FBI credentials, he'd be marked. Word would spread. Every operation he'd touched in the last 18 months would be compromised. Informants would be exposed. People would die. So he waited. Williams was in his patrol car, typing into his computer. Johnson could see him through the windshield, watching the screen, waiting for the system to spit out information. It would come back clean, of course. Bruno Johnson had no warrants, no criminal record, no flags. He was a model citizen on paper. And that, Johnson realized with sinking dread, was going to make Williams even more suspicious. The rookie emerged from the patrol car with a scowl on his face. He walked back to Johnson with the license held between two fingers like it was contaminated. "Clean," Williams said, and it sounded like an accusation. "Too clean." "That's because I haven't committed any crimes, officer." Williams ignored him. "Step away from the vehicle. I want to do a visual inspection." Johnson's jaw tightened. This was the line. Once Williams started searching the car, he might trigger something, press the wrong panel, pull the wrong lever. The surveillance equipment was well hidden, but it wasn't invisible. Not to someone actively looking. "Do you have probable cause for a search, officer?" Johnson glanced at the name tag. "Williams?" The use of his name made Williams bristle. His shoulders went back, his chin lifted. "I have reasonable suspicion. The vehicle modifications, your nervous behavior—" "I'm not nervous," Johnson interrupted, his voice level but firm. "I'm concerned you're making a mistake." Williams took a step closer, entering Johnson's personal space. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm advising you." The words hung in the air between them. Around them, Johnson could see pedestrians slowing down, pulling out phones. Of course, this was 2024. Everything was recorded. Everything went viral. A white cop confronting a well-dressed black man on a Chicago street. This was content gold. Williams saw the phones too. Instead of backing down, he seemed to puff up, playing to an audience he thought would vindicate him. He pulled his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23. I need a tow truck at West Madison and South Kedzie. Suspicious vehicle, driver uncooperative." Johnson's eyes widened. "Officer Williams, do not tow this vehicle." "You don't give me orders," Williams shot back, clipping the radio back to his belt. In his earpiece, Johnson heard a voice he recognized. Diego Martinez, Reaper's top enforcer. "Cops are calling a tow truck. Ghost is getting arrested. This whole thing is a setup." Another voice, panicked, We gotta go right now." Reaper's voice, cold and final. "Meeting's over. Everyone out the back, move." Johnson felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He was losing them. 18 months of careful work, of earning trust one dangerous meeting at a time, of putting his life on the line. It was all evaporating because a rookie cop needed to prove something to himself. "I'm not ordering," Johnson said, and for the first time, real urgency bled into his voice. "I'm begging. Call your supervisor, one call." Williams crossed his arms. "Why? So your friends can show up. So you can call your lawyer? I know how this works." "You don't," Johnson said through gritted teeth. "You really, really don't." Through his earpiece, he could hear footsteps thundering downstairs, doors slamming. The wire was still active, still recording, but all it was capturing now was the sound of an operation dying. In a remote location 3 miles away, the FBI's listening post would be going into crisis mode. And they were. In a converted office building in downtown Chicago, Special Agent in charge Rebecca Martinez was standing in front of a wall of monitors, watching audio waveforms flatten as sources went offline one by one. "Ghost," she said into her headset, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Ghost, we're losing participants. What's happening out there?" Johnson heard her voice crystal clear through his earpiece. He couldn't respond. Not with Williams standing 3 feet away, not with cartel members potentially watching from the windows, not without blowing everything that was left to blow. He just stood there, silent, while Martinez repeated her question with increasing desperation. "Ghost, do you copy? Bruno, talk to me. What the hell is going on?" A tech analyst's voice cut in. "We've lost Martinez, Williams, and Jackson. We still have audio from Reaper's phone, but he's moving. Sounds like he's in a vehicle." Martinez's voice again. "Where's our perimeter team? Can we intercept?" "Negative. They scattered through 3 different exits. We'd need to move now to have any chance, but if Ghost is still in play—" "I know," Martinez snapped. Then, softer, into the mic. "Bruno, if you can hear me, we're standing by. Just hold on." Johnson wanted to scream. He wanted to rip the earpiece out and throw it at Williams' feet and tell him exactly what he'd just done. Instead, he took a slow breath and made one more attempt. "Officer Williams," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I'm going to say this one more time, and I need you to really hear me. That vehicle is not what you think it is. I am not who you think I am. And if you tow that car, you're going to set off a chain reaction that will end very badly for both of us." Williams actually laughed. "Is that right? Let me guess. You're some kind of secret agent. That car is full of spy equipment?" Johnson said nothing. Because what could he say? The truth was so close to what Williams just mocked that any confirmation would sound absurd. In the distance, Johnson heard the unmistakable rumble of a diesel engine. The tow truck was coming. On the street, the crowd was growing. Phones were recording from every angle. Someone shouted, "Leave that man alone." Someone else called Williams a racist. The rookie's face was getting red, and through the earpiece, Johnson heard the final nail. Reaper's voice, distant now, probably in a car blocks away. "Ghost is either the dumbest rat we ever had, or he's legitimate and just got incredibly unlucky. Either way, he's done. Burn that whole connection. We don't use his routes again." The tow truck rounded the corner, its yellow lights flashing. Johnson looked at Williams one last time. The kid actually looked triumphant. "You're going to remember this day for the rest of your life," Johnson said quietly. "I promise you that." Williams smirked. "Yeah, the day I took down a drug dealer in a suit." "Sure," Johnson said, his voice hollow. That's exactly what this is. The tow truck that rumbled around the corner was a battered Ford F550 with Windy City Towing, painted on the door in faded yellow letters. It belched black smoke as it downshifted, air brakes hissing like a mechanical sigh. The driver who climbed out was a thick-bodied man in his 50s, wearing a grease-stained work shirt with Mickey embroidered over the pocket. He had the weathered look of someone who'd towed everything from Hondas to Bentleys and had developed a sixth sense for trouble. Mickey walked around the Charger once, his experienced eyes taking in details Williams had missed. The reinforced wheel wells, the slight sag in the suspension despite the upgraded shocks, the tinted windows that were dark but not illegal, the complete absence of exterior branding or badges. He crouched down and looked at the undercarriage, then stood up and scratched his jaw. "Hey, officer," Mickey said, approaching Williams. "This car looks federal. You sure about this?" Williams bristled at the question. Everyone was questioning him today. Everyone thought they knew better. "I'm sure. Hook it up." Mickey glanced at Johnson, who was standing on the sidewalk with his hands loosely at his sides, his face a mask of controlled desperation. Mickey had been doing this job for 28 years. He knew what a drug dealer looked like when they were about to lose their ride. This wasn't that. This was something else. But the cop had made the call. Mickey shrugged and walked back to his truck. Johnson took a step forward, his voice cutting through the diesel rumble. "Officer Williams, my full name is Bruno Johnson. I'm asking you to run that name through your federal database." Williams turned, his patience clearly exhausted. "I already ran your license. You're clean. That's the problem. Too clean. No tickets, no arrests, no nothing. People who live in this neighborhood have records. You're either bought off someone at the DMV or you're very, very good at what you do. I can provide you with a phone number," Johnson said, his words coming faster now. "It connects directly to—" "I'm not calling your accomplice," Williams snapped, cutting him off. "Step back from the vehicle, Mr. Johnson. This is your last warning." Johnson stood there, frozen in a moment of impossible choice. He could pull his credentials right now. He could end this. But cartel members were watching from those windows. If they saw the FBI shield, word would spread through the organization in minutes. Every informant he'd cultivated would be compromised. People would die. So he stepped back. Mickey maneuvered the flatbed into position, the truck's backup alarm beeping in steady rhythm. He climbed out, pulled the heavy chain from the bed, and knelt beside the Charger's front end. The chains rattled as he hooked them to the frame, the sound metallic and final. "All right," Mickey called out. "She's hooked. You want it on the bed or dragged?" "Just get it out of here," Williams said. Mickey engaged the winch. The electric motor whined, the chain went taut, and the Charger lurched forward 6 inches. Inside the vehicle, $2 million worth of surveillance equipment shifted. Delicate circuit boards that had been calibrated to absorb vibration from driving suddenly experienced a sharp, angular jolt they weren't designed to handle. A ribbon cable connecting the main recording array to the satellite uplink pulled free from its housing. A backup battery compartment popped open, spilling lithium cells onto the floor. And in Johnson's ear, the audio feed crackled once, a sharp burst of static, and went silent. In the FBI listening post 3 miles away, a tech analyst watched his primary screen go black. The audio waveform flatlined. All 6 backup channels showed the same thing. No signal. "We've lost him," the analyst said, his voice rising. "All feeds are down. Ghost is offline." Special agent in charge. Rebecca Martinez grabbed her headset. "Ghost? Ghost, we lost your signal. Do you copy?" Johnson heard her voice through his earpiece. The personal comm was still active, running on its own independent system, But he couldn't respond. Not with Williams watching him. Not with phones recording from the sidewalk. Not with everything already falling apart. Inside the building across the street, in the second-floor meeting room that had been emptied of cartel leadership 60 seconds earlier, a young lookout was watching through a gap in the blinds. He pulled out his phone and sent a text that would ripple through the organization like a shockwave. Cops towed Ghost's car. He's compromised. Operation burned. Reaper, already 3 blocks away in the back of a stolen Escalade, read the text and made a phone call. Close everything down, every location, every stash house, every contact point. If Ghost touched it, it's dead. We go dark for 3 months. The FBI listening post descended into controlled chaos. Martinez was on 3 phones at once, one to the field teams, one to the Chicago PD commissioner, one to the assistant director in Washington. We need to intercept, a tactical coordinator was saying. We can still grab some of them if we move now. We don't know who scattered where, Martinez shot back. And if we move with Ghost still on scene without revealing him, we risk his cover permanently. If we blow his cover and he's not under immediate threat, ma'am, the operation is already blown. Martinez knew he was right. She just didn't want to accept it yet. On the street, Mickey's winch continued its steady pull. The Charger was halfway onto the flatbed now, its front wheels lifted off the pavement. Inside the car, more connections broke. The backup recording systems were trying to compensate, but without the main array, they were capturing nothing. 18 months of surveillance. Hundreds of hours of recorded conversations, video footage, wire transfers, meeting transcripts. All of it was safely stored at FBI headquarters. But the operation itself, the living, breathing investigation that would have led to 50 arrests and seizure of 50 million in product, was dying in real time. So Johnson watched his car being loaded onto the flatbed. His hands hung at his sides, useless. His badge was in that car, locked in a compartment that Mickey would probably find within the first 10 minutes of searching it at the impound lot. His career was in that car. 18 months of his life were in that car. The winch shut off. The Charger sat on the flatbed, chained and secured. Williams walked over to Johnson, pulling a citation pad from his belt. He was actually writing him a ticket. The audacity of it would have been funny if it weren't so catastrophic. Vehicles being impounded, Williams said, not looking up from his writing. You'll get a citation in the mail for the parking violation. You're free to go. Johnson looked at him. Really looked at him. This young cop who had no idea what he'd just done. Who thought he'd won something here? Who would spend the rest of his life understanding the magnitude of this moment? No, Johnson said quietly. I'm not. And neither are you. Williams finally looked up from his citation pad. Is that a threat? It's a prediction. Williams laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. You watch a lot of movies, don't you? Let me guess. Your people are going to come after me? I'm going to wake up with a horse head in my bed? Johnson didn't smile. In about 15 minutes, 4 black SUVs are going to pull up to this intersection. Federal agents are going to exit those vehicles, and they're going to ask you some very difficult questions about why you just towed an FBI surveillance vehicle in the middle of an active operation. Williams stared at him, the citation pad frozen in his hand. You think I'm lying, Johnson continued. You think this is a bluff, but I want you to remember this moment. When those SUVs arrive and you realize I was telling you the truth, I want you to remember that I gave you every opportunity to verify. I asked you to call your supervisor. I asked you to run my name through federal databases. I begged you to make one phone call. Williams shook his head, his smirk returning. Nice try. Johnson reached into his pocket slowly, pulled out his phone, and held it up. This phone has a direct line to the FBI field office. I can call them right now and prove everything I'm saying. Go ahead, Williams challenged. Call them. Johnson pressed a button. The phone dialed. It rang twice before Rebecca Martinez's voice came through the speaker, sharp and commanding. Bruno, what's your status? Williams' smirk faltered. S.A.C. Martinez, Johnson said. His eyes locked on Williams. I'm standing on West Madison with a CPD officer who just impounded my vehicle. We have a situation. There was a brief pause. Then Martinez's voice, ice cold. Put him on the phone. Johnson held the phone out to Williams. The rookie cop didn't take it. He just stared at it, his face going pale, finally understanding that he'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. 90 seconds crawled by like 90 minutes. Johnson stood on the sidewalk, his phone back in his pocket, watching Williams retreat to his patrol car to fill out paperwork. The rookie sat behind the wheel, writing on his citation pad, occasionally glancing up at Johnson with something that might have been nervousness or might have been triumph. It was hard to tell. The crowd of bystanders had grown. 20, maybe 30 people now, phones out, recording everything. Someone was doing a Facebook Live, someone else was narrating for TikTok. The modern Greek chorus, Johnson thought bitterly, documenting a tragedy in real time. Mickey, the tow truck driver, was securing the last of the chains on the Charger, his movements methodical and professional. He kept glancing at Johnson, then at Williams, then back at Johnson. The unease on his face was obvious. Then Johnson heard it, a sound that made his chest tighten with a mixture of relief and dread. Sirens, but not the familiar wail of Chicago PD cruisers. Williams would recognize those, probably relax thinking backup was arriving. These were different, higher-pitched, more urgent. Federal sirens had a distinct electronic keen that cut through urban noise like a knife. Williams heard them too. He looked up from his paperwork, frowning. The first black Chevy Suburban came from the north, moving fast, taking the corner hard enough that its tires squealed. The second came from the south. The third and fourth approached from the west, moving in perfect coordination like wolves converging on prey. Within 10 seconds, all 4 vehicles had boxed in the intersection, creating a perimeter that trapped Williams's patrol car and Mickey's tow truck in the center. The doors flew open in unison. 8 FBI agents poured out, moving with tactical precision. They wore black cargo pants, tactical vests with FBI blazing in yellow letters across the chest and back, and expressions that suggested they were not here to negotiate. Most carried Glock 19s drawn and held it low, ready. 2 had M4 carbines. The crowd on the sidewalk gasped and scattered backward. Someone screamed. Phones tilted upward, capturing everything. From the lead Suburban, a woman emerged. She was in her mid-40s, Latino, with sharp features and hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a navy blue FBI windbreaker over a white shirt and tactical pants, and she moved with the kind of purposeful stride that made it clear she was in charge. This was Special Agent in Charge Rebecca Martinez, and she looked like she was about to ruin someone's entire career. She walked straight to Williams' patrol car and rapped her knuckles on the driver's side window. Hard. Williams jumped, then rolled down the window, his face a mixture of confusion and defensive indignation. "Officer," Martinez said, her voice sharp as broken glass, "step out of your vehicle, now." Williams blinked. "I'm Chicago PD. This is my scene." Martinez leaned down so she was eye level with him. "Not anymore, it's not." Williams opened his door and stepped out, his training kicking in automatically. His right hand drifted toward his service weapon, not to draw it, just a reflexive movement to keep it secure when exiting the vehicle in a tense situation. 8 FBI weapons snapped up in perfect unison, all aimed at center mass. "Hands away from your weapon!" 3 voices shouted simultaneously. Williams froze, his blood turning to ice water. His hands shot up, fingers spread wide. "Whoa, whoa, I'm a police officer." "We know," Martinez said coldly. "Hands on the hood of your vehicle, now." Williams complied, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe the guy in the tan suit really did have connections. Maybe this was a shakedown. Maybe... Martinez ignored him and walked over to Johnson, her expression softening marginally. "Agent Johnson, status." Johnson met her eyes. For the first time in 18 months, he didn't have to pretend. He didn't have to measure his words or calculate his response. He could just tell the truth. "Wire disconnected when they towed the vehicle. Operation is blown. Primary subjects fled the scene approximately 4 minutes ago. Reaper, Martinez, Williams, all in the wind." Behind him, Williams made a strangled sound. "Agent, what?" Johnson reached up and pulled his shirt collar to the side, revealing the thin chain around his neck. He lifted it, and hanging from the chain was his FBI credentials case. He'd been wearing it the entire time, hidden under his shirt and tie. He flipped it open, showing the shield and ID card. Special Agent Bruno Johnson, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Williams stared at it. The color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. Martinez turned to Williams, her voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor addressing a defendant. "Did this agent identify himself to you?" Williams's mouth opened and closed. He said he was a financial consultant. "Did he ask you to call your supervisor?" Silence, then barely audible. "Yes." "Did he ask you to verify his identity?" He said to run his name through the federal database. "And did you?" Williams looked at the ground. "I ran his license." Martinez let the words hang in the air for a moment, then delivered the killing blow. "His license. Not his name through federal databases. Not a call to your supervisor. You ran a license, and when it came back clean, you decided that was suspicious." From the tow truck, Mickey called out, his voice tinged with desperate self-preservation. "I told him this looked federal. I asked if he was sure." Martinez glanced at the tow truck driver, then back at Williams. "Even the civilian contractor had better instincts than you." Another vehicle turned onto the street. A dark blue, unmarked sedan with a small emergency light magnetically attached to the roof. It pulled up to the perimeter, and a man in his late 50s stepped out. He was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, wearing a white shirt with CPD captain's bars on the collar. His face was weathered from 30 years of Chicago streets, and right now it was creased with confusion. Captain Gerald Williams had been monitoring the radio when he heard the chatter. "FBI on scene. West Madison and Kedzie, officer-involved incident." His first thought was that his son might need backup. His second thought was dread. He walked through the perimeter of FBI vehicles, his eyes taking in the scene piece by piece. 8 federal agents, 4 SUVs. A tow truck with a blacked-out Charger on the bed, a crowd of civilians with phones. And there, standing with his hands on a patrol car hood, was his son. And there, standing next to an FBI SAC, was a man in a tan suit with credentials hanging from his neck. Captain Williams stopped walking. He didn't need an explanation. 30 years on the job had given him the ability to read a scene in seconds, and what he was reading made his stomach drop. "Oh, Ray," he said softly. "What did you do?" Raymond Williams turned his head, saw his father, and the last shred of defiance crumbled. Dad, I... Don't. Captain Williams held up a hand. He looked at Martinez. I'm Captain Gerald Williams, 15th District. That's my son. Can someone tell me what happened here? Martinez studied him for a moment, and her expression softened slightly. Professional courtesy between commanders. Captain, your son just towed an FBI surveillance vehicle in the middle of an 18-month undercover operation targeting the disciples of Chaos Cartel. He was asked multiple times to verify the vehicle and the driver's identity. He refused. The operation is now compromised. $50 million in fentanyl distribution is back on the street because your son decided a black man in a nice car couldn't possibly be legitimate. Captain Williams closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked older, tired, broken. He looked at his son. Really looked at him. You were taught better than this, he said quietly. I was trying to make you proud, Raymond whispered. You were trying to make yourself proud, his father corrected, and you just destroyed everything. Behind them, Johnson stood silent, watching a family implode in real time. He felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just exhaustion. And overhead, the sound of phone cameras clicking, recording the moment a legacy died on a Chicago street. More vehicles arrived, 2 more unmarked sedans with exempt plates. A white van with FBI Evidence Response Team stenciled on the side. Within minutes, the intersection had transformed from a routine traffic stop into a federal crime scene. Martinez stood with Captain Williams and 2 other Chicago PD commanders who'd responded to the radio chatter, her voice clipped and professional as she laid out exactly what had been lost. 18 months deep cover, she said, consulting a tablet one of her agents had handed her. Agent Johnson infiltrated the Disciples of Chaos organization as a financial consultant specializing in money laundering, $50 million in fentanyl distribution, networks across 5 states, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio. We had suppliers, distributors, street-level dealers, corrupt officials. Everything. Today was the final meeting where leadership would confirm routes and payment structures. We needed 1 more hour of conversation. She looked up from the tablet, her eyes hard. Your officer scared them all away. Captain Williams stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. The other commanders looked uncomfortable, already calculating how this would blow back on the department. Near the tow truck, 2 FBI technical specialists in blue windbreakers were examining Johnson's Charger with handheld diagnostic equipment. One of them had the hood open, probing the dashboard electronics with a multimeter. The other was underneath the vehicle with a flashlight. The one under the hood called out, S.A.C. Martinez, we've got significant damage to the primary recording array. The jolt from the tow disconnected the satellite uplink and knocked the backup storage offline. Martinez walked over. Can you recover the data? The data that was already uploaded to the server? Yes, that's safe. But everything from approximately 9:47 a.m. to now is lost. The system was still recording locally when the connection broke. Martinez did the math in her head. The meeting had started at 9:30. They'd lost the last 30 minutes. The most critical 30 minutes when names and routes would have been finalized. God damn it, she said quietly. Captain Williams turned to his son, who was still standing by the patrol car, hands no longer on the hood, but hanging uselessly at his sides. The father's voice was measured, controlled, but there was steel underneath. Did you follow proper escalation procedures? Raymond's defenses went up immediately. I saw a suspicious vehicle. That's not what I asked. Captain Williams cut him off. Did he comply with your requests? Raymond hesitated. Yes, but... Did he threaten you? No, but... Did he physically resist? No, but... Did he ask you to verify his story? The question hung in the air. Raymond's voice came out barely above a whisper. Yes. Captain Williams stood there for a long moment, looking at his son. Then he turned away, facing the street, his back to Raymond. He couldn't look at him anymore. The sound of rotor blades cut through the tension. 2 news helicopters were circling overhead now, their cameras with telephoto lenses capturing every detail. Channel 5 and Channel 7, drawn by the scanner traffic and the social media posts that were already going viral. From above, the scene would look damning. Federal agents surrounding a Chicago cop, a black man in a suit standing near FBI leadership, a tow truck with an expensive car loaded on the bed. This was going to be the lead story on every news station in the city. Martinez walked back to where Raymond stood. 2 of her agents flanked her. She pulled a card from her pocket and began reading. Officer Raymond Williams, you are being detained for federal obstruction of justice under Title 18, Section 1509. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Dad? Raymond's voice cracked on the word. He looked at his father's back, willing him to turn around, to say something, to fix this like he'd fixed everything else in Raymond's life. Captain Williams didn't turn. His shoulders were rigid, his head slightly bowed. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. Don't call me that right now. Johnson stood 15 feet away, watching this family drama unfold. He'd spent 18 months pretending to be someone else, wearing a mask, playing a role. But there was no mask for this. This was raw human pain, a father watching his son destroy himself. A son realizing his hero couldn't save him this time. Johnson felt no satisfaction, no sense of justice served. Just bone-deep exhaustion and a profound sadness that this was how it ended. From the crowd, a reporter with a Channel 7 microphone pushed forward, shouting over the noise, Captain Williams, Captain Williams, is that your son being arrested by the FBI? Captain Williams turned slightly, just enough for the cameras to see his face. No comment. But his expression said everything. Pain, shame, the weight of 30 years of building a reputation that his son had just incinerated in a single morning. One of Martinez's agents produced zip-tie restraints. Not handcuffs, which would have shown some professional courtesy, but the plastic restraints reserved for suspects who weren't law enforcement. Raymond held out his wrists, his hands trembling. Zip. The sound of the restraints tightening was loud in the relative quiet. They walked him to one of the black Suburbans, one agent on each arm. He moved like a man in a dream, his feet shuffling, his eyes unfocused. As they opened the rear door and guided him inside, Raymond turned his head one last time. His father was still standing with his back to him, looking at the ground. Captain Williams' shoulders were slumped now, the rigid military posture that had defined him for 3 decades finally broken. He looked small, defeated. In the back of the Suburban, Raymond pressed his face close to the window, his bound hands in his lap, watching his father shrink in the distance as the vehicle remained stationary. Waiting. Processing. He wanted his father to turn around, to look at him, to give him something, anger, disappointment, anything other than that terrible, silent rejection. But Captain Williams didn't turn. Martinez approached him, her voice gentler now. For what it's worth, Captain, I know your reputation. You're a good cop. One of the best. You took down the West Side Kings, the Latin disciples. You've given 30 years to this city. I know, Captain Williams said quietly. But your son, my son, the captain interrupted, his voice hollow, just ended my career too. Martinez started to object, to say something about how this wasn't his fault, but she stopped, because they both knew it wasn't that simple. In the court of public opinion, in the fraternal order of police politics, in the media narrative that was already being written, Captain Gerald Williams's legacy would forever be tied to this moment. The legendary cop whose son destroyed an FBI operation. The father who raised a racist rookie. The Williams name, which had meant honor and service, would now mean this. Around them, phones were everywhere, recording, uploading. The video quality was crystal clear, 4K smartphones capturing every detail. Someone had already posted to TikTok, "Rookie cop just arrested FBI agent in a suit because he looked suspicious." Another on Twitter, "Breaking, Chicago PD officer detained by FBI after destroying undercover operation. The agent he profiled was black, threat incoming." Facebook live streams were running with hundreds of viewers commenting in real time. The story was already out of control, spreading like wildfire through social media. By the time the evening news aired, it would be national. By tomorrow morning, it would be international. And in the middle of it all, two men, father and son, stood on a Chicago street, separated by 30 feet and an unbridgeable chasm of shame. Martinez signaled to her agents. The Suburban carrying Raymond pulled away from the curb, heading to the FBI field office for processing. Captain Williams watched it go, his face expressionless. Then, slowly, he turned and walked back to his own car, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for the door handle. Johnson watched him leave, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt a flicker of something other than anger. He felt pity for everyone involved. 8 months later, the Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago was surrounded by news vans. Satellite trucks lined the street, their telescoping antennas reaching toward the gray November sky. Reporters did stand-ups on the courthouse steps, speaking into cameras with the building's imposing limestone columns as backdrop. Today marks the opening of the federal trial against former Chicago police officer Raymond Williams, who stands accused of obstructing an FBI investigation. Inside, courtroom 7C was packed to capacity. The gallery was filled with reporters, curious lawyers on their lunch break, and law enforcement personnel from various agencies, some supporting Williams, most just there to witness the spectacle. Raymond Williams sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting gray suit that had probably come from a discount store. His attorney, Barry Goldstein, was a strip mall lawyer who'd taken the case because Williams couldn't afford anyone better. The union had declined to provide counsel once they'd seen the evidence. Goldstein kept shuffling papers nervously, occasionally leaning over to whisper something that Williams barely seemed to hear. In the gallery, 3 rows back on the left side, sat Captain Gerald Williams. Retired now, though not by choice. He'd submitted his resignation 6 weeks after the incident. He's citing family concerns, but everyone knew the truth. The pressure had been unbearable. The questions, the media, the internal affairs investigation into whether he'd shown favoritism to his son during his training. He looked older now, his gray hair thinner, his face more deeply lined. He wore civilian clothes, khaki pants, a button-down shirt, and he sat alone, staring straight ahead. The United States calls Special Agent Bruno Johnson. Johnson entered from the back of the courtroom wearing his FBI dress uniform. Navy blue with gold buttons, his service medals arranged precisely on his chest. He walked with quiet confidence, took the oath with his right hand raised, and settled into the witness chair. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen stood at the podium, a slim folder in her hands. "Agent Johnson, please describe your assignment prior to May 14, 2024. Johnson's voice was steady, professional. I was assigned to an 18-month deep cover operation targeting the Disciples of Chaos, a fentanyl distribution network operating primarily in the Midwest. My role was to pose as a financial consultant specializing in money laundering. I built relationships with mid-level distributors, earned their trust, and gradually worked my way into the confidence of the organization's leadership. What risks did this assignment entail? Significant ones. I was operating without backup in close proximity. If my cover had been blown, I would have been killed. The Disciples of Chaos have murdered at least 14 people we know of. Informants, rival dealers, anyone they perceive as a threat. Can you describe the scope of their operation? The Disciples of Chaos are responsible for approximately 40% of fentanyl distribution in the Midwest. They move product through 5 states, generating an estimated $50 million annually. They have connections to cartel suppliers in Mexico, street-level distribution networks in major cities, and corrupt officials who facilitate their operations. Chen paused, letting the numbers sink in with the jury. On the morning of May 14th, where were you? Conducting surveillance outside their headquarters on West Madison. That morning was critical. Leadership was meeting to finalize distribution routes, confirm payment structures, and identify new contacts. We were one conversation away from having everything we needed to dismantle the entire network. One conversation? Johnson nodded. Everything we'd worked for was happening in that room. Names, locations, routes, payment methods, everything. And then Officer Williams arrived. Did you identify yourself as FBI? I couldn't. Not explicitly. Cartel members were watching from the windows. If I'd revealed my identity, my cover would have been permanently blown. I'd be marked for death, and every informant I'd cultivated would be compromised. 3 of them have since been relocated into witness protection because the operation was exposed. So, what did you do? I tried everything short of explicit identification. I asked Officer Williams to call his supervisor multiple times. I asked him to run my name through federal databases. Not just my license, I remained calm and professional. I even attempted to provide him with a phone number that would have connected him directly to our field office. Johnson's jaw tightened slightly. He refused every single attempt. And what was his response to these requests? He thought I was stalling. He interpreted my professional demeanor as arrogance. He saw a black man in a tailored suit standing next to an expensive car in a low-income neighborhood and assumed I was a criminal. Despite every indication to the contrary, despite every opportunity I gave him to verify, he saw what he wanted to see. Defense attorney Goldstein shot to his feet. Objection! Speculation about my client's motives. Judge Patricia Morrison barely glanced at him. Overruled. The witness is describing his direct observations and the defendant's stated reasoning. Continue, Agent Johnson. What happened to the operation? Chen asked. Johnson's expression darkened. Dead. 18 months of work gone. 3 confidential informants had to be relocated. Their lives are in danger now because their association with me was exposed. The cartel scattered, went dark for months. The fentanyl is still on the streets, $50 million worth. We lost everything. Chen nodded to the courtroom deputy, who dimmed the lights. On screens mounted throughout the courtroom, Williams' body camera footage began to play. The jury watched in high definition as the confrontation unfolded. They heard Johnson's calm, measured requests. They heard Williams' dismissive responses. They saw every moment of escalation. The key exchange played clearly. Johnson saying, "I'm asking you to call your supervisor," and Williams responding, "I don't need permission to do my job." In the gallery, Captain Williams put his head in his hands. When the lights came back up, Chen rested her case. Goldstein whispered urgently to Raymond, clearly advising him not to testify. But Raymond shook his head. He wanted to explain. He wanted them to understand. He took the stand. "Officer Williams," Chen began, "you testified in your deposition that you were trained to identify suspicious behavior. Can you explain what you found suspicious about Agent Johnson? The vehicle modifications, the location outside a known gang headquarters, his demeanor." His demeanor? Was he nervous? He was too calm. That's suspicious. Chen paused, letting the jury absorb that. So, cooperation is suspicious. Asking for supervisor verification is suspicious. Remaining calm and professional is suspicious. She leaned on the podium. "Tell me, Officer Williams, what would a federal agent have to do to convince you he was legitimate?" "Show me his badge." He couldn't. He was undercover, and showing his badge would have gotten him killed. But he asked you to verify his identity through official channels, through your supervisor, through federal databases, through a phone number. You refused all of these. Why? Williams hesitated. You thought what? I thought he was lying. Based on what evidence? The neighborhood, the car, Williams trailed off, realizing the trap. "The what?" Chen pressed. Silence stretched across the courtroom. "You thought a black man couldn't legitimately own that car, to wear that suit or hold that position. Isn't that the truth?" "No, Your father is Captain Gerald Williams, correct? 30 years on the force. Decorated career." "Yes." "You were trying to live up to that legacy, trying to make a big arrest, and you saw what you wanted to see, regardless of the evidence in front of you." Raymond had no answer. He looked at his lap. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. On the count of federal obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. Raymond's face went through shock, denial, then, finally, resignation. Judge Morrison sentenced him to 3 years in federal prison, a $100,000 fine, and a permanent ban from law enforcement. Captain Williams stood and walked out without looking at his son. Outside, a reporter caught Johnson on the steps. "Agent Johnson, how do you feel about the verdict?" Johnson stopped, looked at the camera, and spoke with quiet exhaustion. "I don't feel vindicated. I feel sad. A career destroyed, a family broken, and the criminals we were after are still free. Nobody won today." He walked away into the cold Chicago afternoon, leaving the reporters behind. 18 months into his sentence, Raymond Williams had learned that time moves differently behind concrete walls. Outside, 18 months was a year and a half. Seasons changing, holidays passing, life continuing its forward march. Inside the Federal Correctional Institution at Terre Haute, Indiana, 18 months was 547 days of fluorescent lighting, steel doors, and the particular silence that comes from being surrounded by hundreds of men while being utterly alone. Williams was housed in protective custody, a necessary precaution for ex-law enforcement. The irony wasn't lost on him. The badge that was supposed to protect him now made him a target. His cell measured 8 feet by 10 feet, containing a metal bunk bolted to the wall, a stainless steel toilet sink combination, and a small desk. He spent 23 hours a day inside these walls, 1 hour for recreation, if he chose to take it. Most days he didn't. He'd lost 35 pounds. The muscle he'd built at the police academy had melted away, replaced by a gaunt, hollow-eyed version of himself that he barely recognized in the polished steel mirror above his sink. His face was all angles now, cheekbones sharp, eyes sunken. He looked like a ghost of Raymond Williams. The first week had been the worst. During intake processing, as he'd stood in line for his prison uniform, An inmate 3 spots ahead had turned around and squinted at him. "Yo, wait. The man's face had lit up with recognition and malicious joy. "You that cop who arrested the FBI agent, the one from the video. Dumbass rookie." He'd started laughing, a loud braying sound that attracted attention from every direction. Within minutes, everyone knew. The cop who'd destroyed a federal operation. The racist rookie. The viral video made flesh. Williams had learned to keep his head down after that. Now, during his 1 hour of recreational time, he stood in the corner of the yard, hands in his pockets, watching the other inmates cluster into their groups. Gang members, drug dealers, white-collar criminals who'd made better choices than he had. None of them approached him. Ex-cop was a scarlet letter that kept everyone away except for the occasional person who wanted to spit insults from a safe distance. Back in his cell, Williams had 2 letters taped to the wall above his desk. He read them so often he'd memorized every word, but he still took them down sometimes, unfolding the creased paper carefully. The first was from his mother, dated 6 months ago. "Raymond, your father and I have separated. I'm staying with my sister in Indianapolis for a while, maybe permanently. I can't bear the looks from the neighbors anymore. The whispers at church. The way people cross the street when they see me coming. I know this isn't your fault entirely, but I can't carry this weight anymore. I'm sorry. I love you, but I need to survive this. Mom." The second letter had arrived 3 months ago. It was the only communication he'd received from his father. The handwriting was shaky, as if written by someone whose hand trembled with emotion or age or both. "Ray, I wanted you to be better than me. Instead, you became a cautionary tale. I don't know if I failed you or you failed yourself. I'm too tired to figure it out anymore. Dad, no love, no your father, just Dad and a dash." Williams held the letter now, sitting on his bunk, and felt a single tear slide down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away, there was no one to see it. The common area during recreation time had a television bolted high on the wall, protected behind thick plexiglass. It was usually tuned to sports or mindless daytime programming, but today someone had changed it to a news channel. Williams had come out of his cell for the first time in 3 days, drawn by the noise and the need to see something other than his 8x10 walls. On the screen, a news anchor was introducing a segment. Coming up, the Johnson Protocol. How one rookie cop's mistake changed federal law enforcement training forever. Williams felt his stomach drop. The segment opened with footage from that day. The same viral video everyone had seen. Then it cut to FBI training facilities at Quantico, where instructors were teaching a class full of recruits and police officers. On the projection screen behind them was Williams's mugshot. The instructor, a middle-aged black man in an FBI polo shirt, pointed at the image. "This is former Officer Raymond Williams. This is what happens when bias overrides protocol, when assumptions override verification, when ego overrides common sense." The camera showed recruits taking notes, serious faces, people learning from his failure. "The Johnson Protocol," the instructor continued, "requires any officer making contact with someone claiming federal affiliation to verify through a supervisor within 15 minutes. It mandates cross-database checking. It creates accountability. This protocol exists because of one traffic stop in Chicago that destroyed an 18-month operation." Williams stared at the screen, watching himself become a teaching tool, a warning, a punchline. His cellmate, a 40-year-old embezzler named Marcus, who was one of the few people who occasionally spoke to him, shook his head. "You famous." "Man." Williams didn't look away from the screen. "Wrong kind of famous." Marcus didn't disagree. 2 weeks later, Williams sat across from Dr. Patricia Chen, the prison psychologist assigned to his case. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she had the patience of someone who'd heard every excuse and rationalization in the book. "Raymond," she said gently, "do you understand what you did wrong?" Williams answered automatically, the response he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. "I should have called my supervisor." Dr. Chen tilted her head. "That's procedure. I asked if you understand what you did wrong." Williams was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was smaller. I saw what I expected to see, not what was really there." "And what did you expect to see?" The silence stretched. Williams looked at his hands, at the industrial tile floor, at the clock on the wall. Anywhere but at Dr. Chen's patient waiting face. Finally, a criminal. Because that's what I was taught to see in that neighborhood, with that look. By who? "Nobody taught me explicitly," Williams said quickly, defensively. "But the stories, the assumptions, the patterns we were told to watch for. Expensive car in a poor neighborhood means drug money. Well-dressed black man near gang territory means high-level dealer. Someone who's too calm is probably guilty of something." He laughed bitterly. "I absorbed it all without questioning it. I thought I was being a good cop. I thought I was using my training. And now?" Williams looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "Now I'm the pattern. The story other cops are told. The warning. I'm the training video they show to teach people what not to do." He swallowed hard. "I wanted to be my father, the hero cop, the legend. Instead, I'm the cautionary tale he's ashamed of." Dr. Chen made a note in her file. "That's the first honest thing you've said in 6 months of sessions." Williams didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Outside his cell window, through the narrow slit of reinforced glass, he could see a sliver of sky. It was gray and overcast, the kind of day that made everything look flat and lifeless. He had 18 months left on his sentence. 18 months to sit with the weight of what he'd destroyed. 18 months to become whoever Raymond Williams would be when he finally walked out of here. If there was anyone left to be. 3 years later, the main auditorium at the FBI Training Academy in Quantico, Virginia, was filled to capacity. 200 new recruits sat in tiered seating, their faces eager and nervous. 50 police officers from departments across the country filled the back rows, here for mandatory joint training. At the front of the room stood Special Agent Bruno Johnson, now training coordinator for interagency operations. He looked different than he had on that Chicago street. A little older, grayer at the temples, but his eyes held something new, the quiet authority of someone who'd turned tragedy into purpose. 3 years ago, Johnson began, I was 30 minutes from the biggest bust of my career. 18 months of deep cover. 50 million in fentanyl, an entire cartel network ready to fall. Today, I'm going to tell you how it died. For 20 minutes, he walked them through Operation Ghost. The risks, the close calls, the trust he'd built brick by dangerous brick. Then he showed the body cam footage, now unclassified for training. The recruits watched in silence as Raymond Williams made every wrong choice, dismissed every warning, ignored every opportunity to verify. When the lights came up, Johnson let the silence breathe before speaking. Officer Williams wasn't a bad person. He was undertrained, overeager, and biased. That combination is deadly. A hand rose from the police section. A young white cop, mid-20s. What should Williams have done differently? The moment I asked him to call his supervisor, that should have been a red flag. Criminals don't make that request. But he was so focused on what he thought he saw, a drug dealer in a suit, that he couldn't hear what I was actually saying. Another hand, from an FBI recruit. "Are you angry at him?" Johnson paused. "I was, for a long time, but anger doesn't bring back 18 months of work. Anger doesn't put dealers in prison. Training does. Protocol does." He gestured at the room. "This is how we prevent the next Raymond Williams." He clicked a remote. The screen showed a formal document with the FBI seal, the Johnson Protocol. He explained the provisions: mandatory supervisor verification within 15 minutes, cross-database checking beyond license plates, automatic review when verification requests are denied, immediate escalation for specialized vehicles. "My operation died that day," Johnson said quietly, "but it gave birth to something bigger. Every one of you will face moments where what you see conflicts with what you're told. The question is, will you have the wisdom to verify before you act?" 200 miles away, in a small Evanston apartment, retired Captain Gerald Williams sat watching that same session on C-SPAN. The apartment was sparse, bare walls except for one photograph of his family from before everything fell apart. His phone rang, the private investigator he'd hired. "Captain, I tracked down the Disciples of Chaos. Without the FBI case, they expanded. 7 states now, 200 million annually." Gerald hung up and stared at the phone, at the numbers representing lives destroyed because his son made one catastrophically bad decision. A knock at the door. A letter slipped underneath. Federal Bureau of Prisons. Parole hearing notice. Inmate Raymond Williams. Gerald's hands trembled. He saw flashes. Teaching a small boy to throw a baseball, his son's academy graduation, the moment on that Chicago street when their eyes met and everything shattered. He sat at his desk and began to write. To the parole board. "My son made a mistake that cost lives, careers, and justice. But I made a mistake too. I put so much pressure on him to live up to a legacy that I never taught him what that legacy meant. It wasn't about big arrests or family pride. It was about wisdom, patience, and seeing people as they are, not as we fear them to be." The gates of FC One Terre Haute opened with a mechanical clank. Raymond Williams walked through wearing donated civilian clothes that hung loose on his thin frame. He carried a clear plastic bag, a few letters, a book, $23. No family waited. But someone was there. Bruno Johnson stood leaning against a black sedan, arms crossed. Williams stopped, frozen. "Agent Johnson." "Just Johnson now. I'm not here officially." "Why are you here?" "Because someone needs to witness the end of this story. And because I wanted to tell you something." Williams' guard went up. "What?" "I forgive you." Williams' eyes filled with tears. "I destroyed your operation. I cost you." "Yes, you did, and I was angry for a long time. But I've spent 3 years teaching thousands of officers about what happened. Your mistake is preventing hundreds more. In a strange way, you've saved more lives as a cautionary tale than I did in 15 years undercover. That doesn't undo what I did. No, it doesn't. But maybe it gives it meaning." Silence. 2 men whose lives had collided and destroyed each other, now standing on opposite sides of a chasm. "I tried to be my father," Williams said quietly. "I know. I failed. You didn't fail at being your father. You failed at being yourself. There's a difference." Johnson pulled out an envelope. Williams opened it with shaking hands. A job application for a private security firm. A letter of recommendation from Johnson. "You're recommending me?" "Not for law enforcement. Never again. But for a security job that requires someone who understands the consequences of poor judgment. Someone who can teach others what not to do. Your story has power, Williams. Use it to help, not harm. Williams' voice broke. I don't deserve this. No, you don't. But redemption isn't about deserving, it's about becoming. Johnson got in his car and drove away, leaving Williams standing alone on the sidewalk, holding an envelope and a second chance. Williams looked back at the prison, its walls gray and imposing. Then he looked forward, toward the city, toward whatever future he could build from the ruins. My name is Raymond Williams, he whispered. I'm the cop who destroyed an FBI operation because I saw a black man in a suit and assumed he was a criminal. I spent 3 years in prison. I lost my career, my family, and my father's respect. But I learned something in that cell, something I should have known before I ever put on a badge. The uniform doesn't make you right. The badge doesn't make you wise. And the gun doesn't make you just. Those things require something deeper. They require seeing people as they are, not as you fear them to be. He folded the envelope and put it in his pocket. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn back what I lost. I don't know if I ever will, but I have to try. He took a step forward, then another, toward redemption, toward becoming, toward whatever Raymond Williams would be next.